The saw with finger-saving technology. No, hot dog-saving technology. Actually, it's neither. We teamed up with Acme Tools to bring you the SawStop compact 10-inch table saw. Now, in addition to the automated technology that actually stops the blade when it senses some type of flesh, it also is packed full of other features as well as being very well organized. Now let's dig into all these features, and yes, we're going to test that additional brake cartridge they sent us. Let's get started. This is the SawStop compact table saw. No long product number to know there, just the even known as the CTS. So 10-inch compact table saw, probably something like a job site saw that you would carry to jobs or to keep in your shop, garage, what have you. The cool thing about this, it has the SawStop technology on the blade and really on the brake cartridge, and we'll get into that here in a moment. But specifically, it has the AIM technology, which is the active injury mitigation. That's the key word there, mitigation. It is not hazard removal or safe table saw. It's active injury mitigation. Those are the words chosen by SawStop, and I think it's great because if you look at the word mitigation, it means the action of reducing severity, seriousness, or painfulness of something. So you have not eliminated the threat. SawStop has not removed a spinning 10-inch saw blade. That's still in there, but what they've done is they've mitigated or lessened the severity if something is to happen. So treat a table saw like a table saw, whether it has the SawStop name on it, the AIM technology or not. Treat a table saw like a table saw. That's number one thing I want to make sure that people understand. Just because we've added something or they've added something to lessen the severity of it doesn't mean that you've removed the hazard at all. Anyway, let's move on. SawStop, we have the AIM technology, which if you haven't seen it before, basically this is kind of it in a nutshell. And basically one of these cartridges is inside the saw, and we'll get to that, and we'll probably even change this out here shortly. I'm not going to explain how that works, but I'll show you how it works because they sent us an extra one. We might as well use it. As I mentioned, we have a 10-inch blade, and typical table saw fashion, you basically crank this to raise the blade. Now, on some of their other saws, it's like a one turn and raises the blade all the way up, one turn and lowers it down. Not on the compact model. You do have to crank it several times to crank the blade up. Not a big deal to me. But the cool thing about this is if we're adjusting our miter angle, so if we're adjusting this angle here, all I have to do is, number one, I can micro adjust just by turning this, and it'll move it slowly, or I can just pull it in and I can move this wherever I need to and set it at, say, 22.5, and then again fine tune that as I need to, pull it in again, slam it back to 0, and we're good to go. Very large push to stop and pull to start button there. A couple of other things here. We have a master power switch, and then we have the AIM bypass. So that is the bypass here. It's like a key. And again, we'll show that when we use it, but basically you power on, turn this over, and then you'll have some status lights here that'll show you that the bypass has been disabled, so it won't go into the AIM technology where it stops the blade and helps to mitigate any possible injuries. Now, maximum table size on this is 23 inches wide and 22 5/8 inches deep. So blade all the way up, we get a 3 1/8 inch cutting capacity, and at a 45 degree, we get a max of 2 1/8 inch cutting capacity. It looks like actually a little bit more than 2 1/8, maybe even closer to 2 1/4. But anyway, at a 45, you're looking at 2 1/8, and at 90 or at 0, you're looking at 3 1/8 inches. We get a 15 amp motor that's turning this blade at 4,000 RPM. We get a max rip capacity on the right side of the blade of 24.5 inches and on the left side of the blade at 9.5 inches using the standard fence and rack and pinion system that we have on the saw. Now this saw is not exactly light. It weighs about 68 pounds, but it's not too bad to handle, and it's not something you're carrying around all the time anyway, so that's kind of expected. Seems to be built very well, nice and sturdy. Everything we've used so far, it's been very solid. Now I mentioned a rack and pinion fence system. So as you see here, I can't crank this knob. It's actually locked. All I have to do is pull this out. That unlocks the system, and now I can just turn this, and it's going to move our whole table to the right, to the left. Not really moving the table, it's going to move the fence, so the fence is riding on these guide rails, but it's operated by this rack and pinion system here, and bushings built onto the saw as well. So again, full 9.5 inches to the left and 24 inches to the right. And we have an easy sight line of the actual mark there, where we can actually see our measurements from the left, or to the left and to the right as well. So our two different measurements above and below. Now, in addition to the active injury mitigation on this saw, the other great thing about it is it really just has a place for everything. They've kind of thought of everything. You see the cord wrap right here on the base of the machine, keeping that cord nice and compact and out of the way when you're not using it. Also, the fence, you can see, is tucked up under here under the table. And on the fence is also our push stick. So that clips in there, holds in there tightly. Again, easy to put that fence right back up here. Just mounts underneath, close the clips, and it's back in place. Turn the saw to the back, and you see this lock and unlock lever here. Just flip that to the unlock, lay this back, get out what you need, or you can just remove it. You can pull out your blade guard, your riving knife, your spreader, the anti-kickback paws, the miter gauge. They even have a place that I can store additional brake cartridges, so I can push that in there as well. So this little back compartment really houses all the tools that you'll need, and then after you're done with the day, put it back in there, close it up, and everything's nice and compact. You see here's our dust extraction port. So outside dimensions is 2.5, and inside dimensions looks right at 2.25. So 2.5 on the outside, 2.25 on the inside. Now, even in the top of this insert on the back are your arbor wrenches, which is also used. If you grab this one here, it's kind of got a little like a more of a tapered flathead. And when you need to service the brake cartridge, you actually push this in here like this. You don't have to take out any of these screws. Just push this in here like this and just kind of pry up on it a little bit, and basically just pushes that clip, and that swings out of the way. And then if you need to service this, you run the blade up and you can pull out the brake cartridge. We will do that here in a few moments. I'm not going to do it right this second, but we'll easily change that out, show you how to do it. But that's just access to it. Close it back down, and now you're good to go. And again, you don't have to remove any of these screws to be able to access and service that. SawStop also offers a compact table saw small stand that easily folds up and tucks away, and it holds the saw very well. Also, you see these locking tabs on the front and the back. The front is here, and I'll show you why in a moment, but just so you know, the front has basically the two cradles and the lock, and the back only has the single cradle and the single lock. Now, the best way I've seen to do this is just kind of grab this thing and muscle it in here, and then make sure you're centered here, because you have a kind of a rollout here that kind of cradles the saw, and then you can flip this over, lock it. On the rear, do the same thing, and now it's actually locked into the stand. Now, before we turn this thing on and actually cut with it, I wanted to go over a couple of things, and I don't care whether it's a SawStop or whether it's the Joe Blow Saw Company. I would highly recommend, when you take your table saw out of a package, it goes with a miter saw as well, check all your critical angles and squareness and trueness and things like that. Just a couple of quick measurements will just make your life a lot easier. Now, if you're rough cutting lumber and you don't care, that's fine. I get it. I absolutely get it. But otherwise, and this takes just a few seconds. Crank this blade up, and I would recommend cranking it all the way up. And by the way, don't have it plugged in. And then I've got this real quick square right here. This is actually, I think, from Fast Cap. But anyway, it's got magnets on the bottom, which on an aluminum top, that's not going to help you. However, it will stick to that blade right there. And if we look here out of the package, and by the way, don't test your trueness or your squareness to the actual insert here, the throat plate or whatever you want to call this, the guard. Don't test it here, test it against the table. That's where you're going to have your product riding or your wood riding. So that's what you want to test for squareness. Now, I've got this bottomed all the way out at 0, and you see we're off. Now, it probably doesn't take me shining a light to see, but you can see we're in contact right there, and right here, significant amount of light coming up under there. So we're off quite a ways here on being true. Now, in all fairness, I created that. I actually adjusted it out to where it would show this gap here. When I got the saw, it was actually pretty true. It wasn't exact, but it was very close to being true. But obviously, that's not true there at all. Now, we can easily adjust this. Let me show you how. Now, you can see we have 3 Allen screws right here, right here, right here, and right here. Now, this one shows you that it has a 2-degree negative, 2-degree positive swing. So it has a 4-degree swing. Basically, there's a cam bolt back there where we can adjust. But first, we need to loosen up this one, and you can just back it off a 1/4 turn or so, maybe a 1/2 turn. So I backed off those a 1/2 turn, and now with your square on the blade, and make sure, by the way, that you're at your 0 point with just, I don't know, what was that, a 1/16 of a turn. Now I'm true. I can tighten those screws. And now my blade is nice and square, or nice and perpendicular to the table. So now we'll show you again with it right there on our square. We should see that light start to disappear. There we go, a little more. And that looks like we're pretty good right there. And again, we clamp down our screws, and now our blade is nice and true. And that goes for the same thing here on the fence as well. So put your fence on, clamp it down, and then take your tape measure and measure on this side of the fence and the blade, the opposite side of the fence and blade. And if you need to actually true that up to where it makes sure that it's cut and square, then you can actually loosen these Allen heads up and adjust that a little bit to where you know that it's nice and parallel with the blade. So take a few minutes out of the box, adjust all that to make sure that you're cutting nice and true, nice and square, then you know you're dialed in. Now, if you want to run a blade guard and a riving knife, well, actually the riving knife is on there right now. If you want to remove that, you can easily just flip this red lever right here. Again, you make sure that your saw is unplugged. Flip this lever here and then push this over and pull that out. So if you don't want to run that, you can pull that out. Or if you're going to run the blade guard, and I know some will say you should always run a blade guard. I'm not going to get into that argument right now. For running the blade guard, we have to run this splitter or the extra large riving knife, whatever you want to call it. Push that down, lock that into place. Once you have the splitter in, then the blade guard, this back pin here is going to go in this big old funky looking groove there, and it's going to slide in that back spot. And then you can just push it down and it locks into place. Take it off, you can slide it forward, and the reverse, pull that off. Now you may want to first put on your guard. Self-explanatory there. And then again, you can install the guard. And then your anti-kickback paws. So these nice sharp things here keep wood from kicking back at you. And that, you're going to take this spring right here, and it's going to lock onto that. That spring's going to lock on right there. Slide that in, and this is going to fit in that groove. So now as wood comes in, those teeth grab and enable it not to let it kick back. Take it off, just reverse, kind of pick those paws up, slide this forward, relieve that spring, and now you can put that away. Now a couple of things about the fence. Let's go over. Again, it easily installs. Then I can pull out the lock and be able to adjust this with the rack and pinion. Now you can see when I move this out, over here on the opposite side of the fence, I have this little thing that floats around here. Now there's a couple of things I can do with this. I can flip this over, And what it enables me to do is now have a fence here that's not all the way against the main fence. So I can do it that way. However, I can also move this on out. And now you can see as I move out to say, max cut capacity, which is the 24.5 inches. So now I'm at the max of my rack and pinion rail system. And you can see we have no table here. Well, what I can do with this now is you see these two slots right here. If I raise this out, drop it down to the next one. Now what this is now level with my table. Now as I come in, you will see now my fence here is level with the table. So in other words, when that product is hanging out there, it's now resting on top of this and using the main fence as the fence rather than this. Or again, as I said, I can raise that up a level and now that's above the table. And again, on the opposite side of my fence is my push stick for keeping my fingers out of the way of the blade. You'll see here these status lights. Once we plug the saw in, these are indicators for the front two lights up here by the power button. Kind of lets you know what status you're in, whether we have an error going on, whether we're in bypass mode. So you see when bypass mode is on, the right light is off, the left light is green. You can see coasting down. So again, you can read all this, but basically this is letting us know when we're seeing these lights here on the front, what they actually mean. We've got our saw plugged in. We've got our blade below deck. Not that that matters, but just letting you know, going to power on. Green light, flashing red light. And now it's a blank light. So green light on the left, blank light on the right. Let's power on. Very fast power up, by the way. If you notice, full speed, I would say probably within a second. Okay, and you see the blinking green light telling us that the saw is actually slowing down, and now it stopped. We get the solid green on the left and the blank light on the right. So to go into bypass mode, we're going to turn the power switch on, the main power, and then we're going to turn the bypass mode switch until the red light flashes, and then we're going to pull out on the start. I'll try to keep my hands out of the way here. When the red light flashes, so while in bypass mode, that green light should flash slowly. Now, if the red light starts flashing very quickly and you're cutting, that's telling you that's a conductive material. So this is the way, not only can you turn bypass mode off, but it's also the way to test conductivity in the material you're cutting so you're not tripping that brake cartridge. So you can test that if you're concerned about maybe some wood that's set outside or something like that. You can make a test cut in bypass mode, and if it's actually sensing that conductivity, it will flash that red light. And so now we should basically be returned back. Once we push the stop button, power down, we should be returned back to where now the bypass mode is off. So we get that regular activation of the brake system. So make sure when you power the system up that you wait for the indicator lights to quit flashing and then power up. Because it's actually going through a testing sequence every time it starts up, so you can't just flip it on and pull that out immediately. Okay, we're going to rip down a simple piece of pressure treated 2x lumber. I think this was a 2x8 and we made some cuts on it anyway. It's got a not so straight edge on it. The other side's manufactured edge, so we should be able to rip from that. Okay, so let's just turn it on and run it through. Okay, we'll power on. By the way, we do have dust extraction on. Had quite a bit of residual flying back at us, but I'm pretty sure it's because I was ripping right at the edge of the lumber. So let's take a bigger bite at this and see if we can pull more of that dust away from that blade. So we did catch a little bit more debris, but you're going to have some dust still flying in there, even with the best extraction on. So I want to touch on something else. You saw when I ran my fence in, basically I've got to stop right there. And that's past my 0, and that's as far as in as it'll go. Now I can move my fence over to this screw right here. So let's do that. And now watch what happens when I get here. Number one, let's get our paw and our blade guard off, and we'll run this over to where we can get really close to the blade, but you still see I'm still stopping a little short. Now, you probably don't need to run in close to the blade, but if you did, what you can do is right here, and regardless of which side of the blade I'm on, if I come in here and this is hitting, I can just push this in, bring it all the way in as close as I need, and that's gonna let me run all the way into the blade. But as soon as I run back out, it clicks into place and keeps me from doing so again. Now what I'm going to do, take another piece of pressure treated lumber. I'm going to lower that blade down to where it's just coming through the top. I've removed my blade guard and my divider. I've just got my simple riving knife in there. And we're going to watch this as we cut, see if maybe we can do some better on dust collection. So even though we're not perfect here, we've still got some dust, some particulate that's coming off of this blade. You can see when we lowered the blade down to where it's just kind of piercing the thickness of the wood that we're cutting, and we're cutting something, you know, a little past the blade as well as far as left. We're doing better dust extraction and pulling away more of that into our dust extractor and less going all over the shop, but I don't think you're ever going to totally eliminate it on a table saw like this, unless you get one with a hood that's actually extracting more, but then that limits you more of how much or how little you can actually cut off, things like that. But anyway, it does a decent job at removing a lot of the particulate. And just to make sure we can cut hardwoods, we've got a piece of, I believe this is 8/4, so 2 inches thick of Purple Heart, which has got a very hard Jenga score. It's way up there. So anyway, we're going to see, can we cut this on the SawStop table saw. Well, as I expected, it did not like cutting this hard Purple Heart wood. Now, I didn't expect it would. We should be using probably like a 60 tooth blade on here. This was the 24 tooth blade that comes with this saw, meant for cutting, again, plywood, lumber, things like that. Not hardwood, something that would be furniture grade like this. But we did want to see, hey, would it do it? It did. You saw it kind of wanted to chatter a little bit. Again, that's because it was a 24 tooth blade. Cutting something so hard, we should have had something a lot finer in there. But again, it had the power to cut this. You just had to feed it slow and let it do the work. So we're now going to test out the AIM technology, and we're going to see if we can get this thing to fire by cutting something. So what we're going to cut, I'm going to cut some plywood, but I'm also going to be running my hand in there and run my hand all the way in and touch that blade. Yes, my God-given hand. And there you have it. I can see a tiny nick on that hot dog right there. Now I know I wasn't feeding really fast, but I was feeding at a decent place and barely a nick on that hot dog. So quite extraordinary how this works. Now this quite possibly damages your blade where you need to replace your blade, and then obviously you're going to have to replace the cartridge. However, it probably saved an appendage, or at least a lot of problems with an appendage. Anyway, to get this out, it's really easy to remove this cartridge. However, with the blade buried into it, it might be a little tougher. First thing we want to do is remove the blade. So make sure power's off, unplugged, all that good stuff. And once you get it all broke free, it'll come out all in one piece like that. So just make sure everything's kind of clean. You may want to blow it out, wipe it down, whatever. You have a serial port connection right there that connects with the cartridge right there. And basically they just slide on these pins. It's pretty easy. Once you get the pins lined up, slide it straight on. Should make a connection, no problem at all. Once it's all the way on, then we take this key right here, the lock, slide it in, turn it down, that locks everything into place. And then make sure you lock down your riving knife. And with it locked down, that little red tab should fold over the top of the cartridge just a bit. Then fold down your cover, lock that into place. Yes, I still have all my appendages, including my hot dog finger. Listen, even with that on the end of my finger, it was quite a bit of pucker power, if you will, as that happened. And it happens very fast, and I don't recommend you try this at all. And don't ever take the cover off. And all the stupid stuff that we did it all in the realm of safety, obviously. Anyway, tested it out, and I'm telling you, if I didn't tell you where it was, you'd be hard-pressed to find the mark that it put on that hot dog. Very amazing technology and how it works. Now, there's a very good chance that when this happens, or if this happens to you, that it's going to ruin the blade, as well as obviously the cartridge is going to be done. Now the cartridge is going to run you about $95, and depending on what type of blade you run, you know, you might be out 40, 60, 100, 150 bucks, whatever type of blade you're running. Now in this case, there are two carbide teeth that are missing off of this blade that are probably somewhere buried in the midst of this cartridge here, and obviously the cartridge is damaged. You see all the aluminum, in addition to right here in the holes where the blade embedded, it also distorted all this. So tons of force to actually stop that blade. And if you'll notice, it not only stops the blade, but it also drops the blade below the deck. And that's partly the reason why it saves your flesh so well, because it's not only stopping the rotation, it's dropping that hazard down below the deck, so now you can't touch it any longer. So a couple of things are happening with the inertia. So this cartridge in here fires the aluminum into the rotating blade, and that rotating blade and inertia helps to pull that blade down below deck and really remove that danger as best they can. Really and truly, the best term is the mitigating the severity of what's happening. So as we mentioned in the beginning, don't take this to be your safety device that you can just treat this however you want to. So let's talk about performance of the saw. It cuts pretty well. Power's there. It's a 15 amp saw. You can cut through, 2x material. You can cut through plywood. You can cut through hardwood. When you get into the denser stuff like that hardwood we were cutting, you're going to have to slow up a little bit, probably use a better blade. So it's not the most powerful saw in the world, but organization-wide, it's probably the best. I mean, it has a place for everything. Everything's nice and compact. You don't have loose items as you leave the job site unless you have extra blades, but an extra cartridge is going to fit in there, and everything's going to fit nice and compact in the tool, even cord wrap, things like that. And we even like the locks there built onto the stand as well. So some pretty cool features on this. Price on this saw is going to be $899. So you're paying $900 for this table saw. Is it the most powerful and most feature-esque saw we've ever used? No. At the same time, this is down in that job site table saw range. And you're not going to find this technology on any other saw or any type of technology like it as of yet. So if you're wanting to lessen the severity of possible injuries, then SawStop is probably the way you want to go. Be sure to check it out from Acme Tools. We'll have a link in the description. Also keep track of us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and even TikTok. Hey, and if you don't mind, would you hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't done so already? And by all means, if you hated our video, well, give us a thumbs down, but would you let us know in the comments why? Have a great day. Keep smiling.